Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi. Baruch Hashem, today we begin with a new Masechet, Masechet Baba Batra. Baba Batra, literally the last gate, is the third tractate of Seder Nezikin, literally the books of damages. Now, the majority of the tractate deals with monetary laws that are related to real estate, such as houses, courtyards, fields, and orchards. We begin today with Parak Aleph, Mishnah Aleph. The first chapter of this tractate, Baba Batra, discusses laws that apply when partners divide various types of property that they own together. The first two Mishnayot deal with the law of Hezek Riyah, loss of privacy, literally damage through seeing. When certain types of property are divided, each partner has a right to privacy within his half of the property. The first Mishnah teaches details of these laws as they apply to a courtyard. Hashutafin sheratzu la'asod mechitza bechatzer. If partners agree to divide the courtyard that is between their houses, now the courtyard discussed in this Mishnah is an enclosed front yard that lies between two houses. It was common in those times for such yards to be used for private activities. Bonin et hakotel ba'emtza. They must then build a wall in the middle of the courtyard so that each partner will have privacy in his half of the courtyard. Each neighbor must contribute an equal amount of land in the middle of the courtyard for the wall's foundation, as well as half the cost of materials and construction. Neither neighbor can claim that he agreed only to build a thin wall of boards that would be enough to provide privacy. Each one must contribute enough land for a full thickness wall. Now, usually a person can force his partner or neighbor to divide a shared front yard of this type, even without his agreement. The Mishnah, however, is speaking about a yard that is so small that dividing it into two private yards will result in each neighbor receiving a very tiny yard that will not be useful. Such yards are divided only if the partners agree to do so. However, once they agree to divide the yard with a legally binding agreement, one neighbor can enforce the other to share in the cost of building a dividing wall that is 4 amot high to prevent hezek riyah, loss of privacy. Makom shenagu livnot givin gazit kifisin levenim bonim. In a place where the custom is to build such a wall with rough-edged stones, polished stones, half bricks, or whole bricks, they must build the wall according to the custom. Walls built of these materials must be of the thickness that the Mishnah will list, because flimsier walls might collapse. Although Beit Din would require the partners to rebuild the walls, in the meantime they would have no privacy. Akol kiminaga medina. Everything must be done according to the custom of the community. If the custom of the community is to build such walls of less sturdy materials than those mentioned in the Mishnah, neither party can be required to pay for better materials. Even if the custom is to build a thin wall made of tree branches and palm leaves, this is sufficient as long as the wall is thick enough to provide privacy. If a community's custom allows for even flimsier partitions than branches and leaves, however, it is not followed. Having mentioned 4 common building materials, the Mishnah lists the required thickness for walls that are made of each type. Bigvin ze noten 3 tvachim, ze noten 3 tvachim. If the wall is built of rough-edged stones, this partner provides 3 tvachim of land for the foundation, and that partner provides 3 tvachim of land for the foundation. For a proper wall of rough-edged stones is 6 tvachim thick. And since the proper wall of rough-edged stones is 6 tvachim thick, each partner will provide 3 tvachim. Begazit ze noten tivchaim umechza, v'ze noten tivchaim umechza. If it is built of polished stones, this one provides 2.5 tvachim of land, and this one provides 2.5 tvachim of land. For a proper wall of polished stone is 5 tvachim thick. Such a wall was built of stones whose rough edges were smoothed or sanded away, and it was therefore 1 tefach thinner than a wall of rough-edged stones, 5 tefachim instead of 6. Each neighbor therefore contributes 1/2 tefach less land. Bichfisin zenoten tifchaim, zenoten tifchaim. If it is built of half bricks, this one provides 2 tefachim of land, and this one provides 2 tefachim of land. For such a wall must be 4 tefachim thick. The bricks discussed here were 3 tefachim long when whole. To make a half brick wall, one cuts the bricks in half and then makes the wall from layers of half bricks on each side of the wall, and a 1 tefach layer of cement between the layers to hold them together. The thickness of such a wall was therefore 4 tefachim, 1.5 plus 1.5 plus 1. Bilvenim ze noten tefach umechza v'ze noten tefach umechza. And if it is built of full bricks, this one provides 1.5 tvachim of land, and this one provides 1.5 tvachim of land, for the wall must be 3 tvachim thick. This wall was constructed of a single layer of whole bricks. The bricks were laid so the length of a brick was the thickness of the wall. Now, although the Mishnah already stated that the customs of the community must be followed when building the wall, it teaches specific measurements for these 4 types of walls, because one cannot be forced to build thicker walls of these materials, even if it is customary in the community to do so. According to some authorities, one cannot be forced to build thinner walls of these materials either, because the sages determined that thinner walls of these materials would not last. The Mishnah notes a legal result of the fact that one partner can require the other to build the wall dividing the courtyard. Therefore, if the wall fell and there is a dispute over who built it, the land and the stones belong to both partners equally. Since one can force his partner to provide land and materials for such a wall, we presume that the wall was built by both partners. Therefore, if it collapses, we award half the land and half of the fallen stones to each partner. This is so even if all of the stones had fallen into the yard of one of the partners and he took possession of them for an extended period of time and then claims that he had built the wall himself and that they belong to him. The Mishnah teaches that the general rule that the burden of proof rests upon the one who seeks to take money from the possession of his fellow, what we call that does not apply in this case, because it is outweighed by the legal presumption that the wall was built by both partners. Now, there is no novelty in the Mishnah's ruling that the land is divided equally, as obviously it's not possible for the land to have fallen into one partner's yard. Since the Mishnah had to teach that the stones are divided equally, it mentions the land as well. And that is end of Mishnah Aleph. The second Mishnah of the chapter, Mishnah Bet, explains how the laws of building walls for privacy apply to vegetable gardens and other fields. And similarly, a vegetable garden is considered a place where the custom is to build a wall for privacy, although the reason a wall must be built in the garden is not exactly the same as the reason that it must be built in the front yard. The Mishnah connects the 2 laws with the words "and similarly," v'chen, because the materials and dimensions listed in the previous Mishnah are used for this wall as well. Even a community where there is no clear custom regarding whether gardens are enclosed for privacy is treated like a place where there is such a custom and a wall must be built. If, however, there is an established custom not to build walls around gardens in a certain community, one is not required to do so. Now again, similarly, back to the Mishnah, a vegetable garden is considered a place where the custom is to build a wall for privacy, and we require him, one who buys a portion of such a garden, to build a wall separating the 2 halves of the garden so that people will not be able to see the right vegetables in the garden and cause damage to them with an evil eye. People generally do not perform private activities in the garden, so there is no need to build a wall to ensure privacy. However, the wall must be built to guard against damage that envious onlookers can cause with an ayin hara, an evil eye. Now back to the earlier point of the Mishnah, when we mentioned we require him, one who buys a portion of such a garden, to build a wall. The commentators explain, since the Mishnah speaks of a single person being required to build a wall rather than 2 persons as in the previous Mishnah, the Rav explains that it is referring to a case where a person bought a garden that was previously attached to a larger garden. The buyer is required to build the wall between the 2 gardens. 2 partners who agree to divide their garden are also required to build a dividing wall together. But a valley, a grain field, is considered a place where the custom is not to build a wall because the danger of an evil eye causing damage to a grain field is smaller, and we therefore do not require him to build a wall. The word bik'ah, which literally means valley, is used here to refer to fields of grain. Unless there is an established custom to the contrary, any grain field is considered a place where the custom is that walls are not built, and a buyer of such a field or partners dividing such a field would not be required to build a wall. Although it would seem that a grain field too would need to be protected against ayin hara, a wall is not needed to guard against this danger because it exists only when the grain is fully grown, and this is only for a brief period each season. Indeed, the Gemara on page 2b teaches that it is forbidden to stand and gaze at the fully grown grain field of one's fellow during that period of time for this very reason of ayin hara. A vegetable garden, however, contains many different types of vegetables, and on almost any given day, at least some of them will be fully ripe and subject to damage by ayin hara. Therefore, walls needed to guard against this constant problem. However, if one is still concerned about an evil eye by the grain field and wishes to build a wall around his portion of a grain field, he must move the wall completely within his own property and build it there using his own materials. Since the wall is being built voluntarily by the owner of the grain field, the owner of the neighboring field does not have to contribute any land. Therefore, the one building the wall must move it back from the boundary line so that the entire wall rests on his property, unlike the previous cases where the wall was built with half of the wall on each owner's property. And in this case, he must make a sign on the outside of the wall to show that he built it himself. The sign shows that the wall was built by him alone, and it will protect his rights if the wall collapses, as the Mishnah will explain. Now, the sign is made on the outside of the wall, meaning the neighbor's side. This is done so that the neighbor will not be able to illegally put his own sign after the wall is completed and claim that both partners had agreed to build it, as in the Mishnah's next case. Since the sign must be on the outside, he would have to trespass onto his neighbor's property to place it. As to why the neighbor will not simply remove the sign, that the Gemara discusses on page 4a. Now the Mishnah explains the legal effect of such a sign. Therefore, if the wall that was built in a grain field collapsed and it is determined that such a sign had been present on the wall, the land and the stones belong to him. Now, the Mishnah's final case teaches that the law when two owners of a grain field both agree to build a dividing wall. If the two owners of adjoining grain fields agreed to build a dividing wall, they build the wall in the middle, with each one contributing half of the land. And they make a sign on both this and that side of the wall. The double sign shows that the wall was paid for by both of them together. Therefore, if such a wall collapsed and a double sign had been present, the land and the stones belong to both equally. The land and the stones would also be divided if the wall fell and neither owner had made a sign. The Mishnah only means to teach that if one owner made a sign while the wall was being built, the second owner must immediately put up a second sign before the wall is complete, so he does not lose his rights. And that is Anabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.